I do not see the reason for establishing any limits as to the age of scholars. The phenomena are exactly the same which have always been found to exist when a new mode of education has been rising into fashion. No man of 50 now learns Greek with boys, but in the 16th century it was not at all unusual to see old doctors of divinity attending lectures side by side with young students. With respect to making our college libraries circulating libraries, there is much to be said on both sides. If a proper subscription is demanded from those who have access to them, and if it is all raised by the subscription is laid out and adding to the libraries, the students will be no losers by the plan. Our libraries, at best and at least, would be better than any which would be readily accessible at an up-country station, and I do not know why we should grudge a young officer the pleasure of reading our copy of Boswell's Life of Johnson or Marmontel's Memoirs if he is willing to pay a few rupees for the privilege. I must frankly own that I do not like the list of books. Grammars of rhetoric and grammars of logic are among the most useless furniture of a shelf. Give a boy Robinson Crusoe. That is worth all the grammars of rhetoric and logic in the world. We ought to procure such books as are likely to give the children a taste for the literature of the West, not books filled with idle distinctions and definitions, which every man who has learned them makes haste to forget. Whoever reasoned better for having been taught the difference between a syllogism and an enthymeme? Whoever composed with greater spirit and elegance because he could define an oxymoron or an aposioposis? I am not joking, I am writing quite seriously when I say that I would not much rather order 100 copies of Jack the Giant Killer for our schools than 100 copies of any grammar of logic or rhetoric that is ever written. As for prize givings, I have no partiality for such ceremonies. I think it a very questionable thing whether, even at home, public spouting and acting ought to form part of the system of a place of education, but in this country such exhibitions are peculiarly out of place. I can conceive nothing more grotesque than the scene from Merchant of Venice, with Portia represented by a little black boy. Then too the subjects of recitation were ill chosen. We are attempting to introduce a great nation to the world. We are attempting to introduce a great nation to a knowledge of the richest and noblest literature in the world. The Society of Calcutta assembled to see what progress we are making, and we produce as a sample a boy who repeats some blackguard doggerel of George Coleman's about a fat gentleman who was put to bed over an oven, and about a man midwife who was called out of his bed by a drunken man at night. Our disciple tries to hiccup and tumbles and staggers about in imitation of the tipsy English sailors whom you see at the punch houses. Really, if we can find nothing better worth reciting than this trash, we had better give up English instruction altogether. As to the list of prize books, I am not much better satisfied. It is absolutely unintelligible to me to see why Pope's works and my old friend Moore's La Rouche should be selected from the whole mass of English poetry to be prize books. I would engage to frame a better list. Bacon's Essays, Hume's England, Gibbon's Rome, Robertson's Charles V, Robertson's Scotland, Robertson's America, Swift's Gulliver, Robinson Crusoe, Shakespeare's works, Paradise Lost, Milton's smaller poems, Arabian Nights, Park's Travels, Anson's Voyage, The Vicar of Wakefield, Johnson's Lives, Gil Blas, Voltaire's Charles XII, Southey's Nelson, Middleton's Life of Cicero. These may serve as a specimen. These are books which will amuse and interest those who obtain them. To give a boy Abercrombie on the intellectual powers, Dick's moral improvement, Young's intellectual philosophy, Chalmers' poetical economy is quite absurd. I would not give orders at random for books about which we know nothing. We are under no necessity of ordering at haphazard. We know Robinson Crusoe and Gulliver and the Arabian Nights and Anson's Voyage, and many other delightful works which interest even the very young, and which do not lose their interest to the end of our lives. Why should we order blindfold such books as Markham's New Children's Friend, the Juvenile Scrapbook, the Child's Own Book, Niggins's Earth, Moody's Sea, and somebody else's Fire and Air, books which, I will be bound for it, none of us ever opened? The list ought in all its parts to be thoroughly recast. If Sir Benjamin Malkin will furnish the names of 10 or 12 works of a scientific kind, which he thinks suited for prizes, the task would not be difficult, and with his help I would gladly undertake it. There is a marked distinction between a prize book and a school book. A prize book ought to be a book which a boy receives with pleasure, and turns over and over, not as a task, but spontaneously. I have not forgotten my own schoolboy feelings on this subject. My pleasure at attaining a prize was greatly enhanced by the knowledge that my little library would receive a very agreeable edition. I was never better pleased than when at 14 I was master of Boswell's Life of Johnson, which I had long been wishing to read. If my master had given me, instead of Boswell, a critical pronouncing dictionary or a geographical class book, I should have been much less gratified by my success.